wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
You're listening to A Quirky Journey, the healthy family podcast with your hosts Jo Whitten and Fouad Kassab.
Welcome to A Quirky Journey. This is Fouad Kassab, and with me I have my co-host Jo Whitten. Hi, Jo.
Hello. How you going?
Fantastic.
That's
so
good.
today we've got a special guest, someone who actually trained me in some physical fitness not too long ago. And it's part of a lifestyle that I've been pursuing for years now to learn more and more about what this young man has to teach. Just to give you a little bit of background, around maybe 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I was at work taking a lunch break, and I came across this video on YouTube called something like The Workout That the World Had Forgotten. And I saw this guy. He was in the island of Corsica, just swimming through the rivers and pushing logs and jumping over rocks and climbing trees and crawling and doing all sorts of amazing things. And he looked like, unlike what we usually think of fit people, like extremely bulky or anything like that, he was quite lean and strong and fast. And I was really, really impressed by the way that that person was moving, and was a far cry from the way that I was at the time. Like maybe at the time I'd began to lose some weight. I'd lost come to think of it now, maybe it was 5 or 6 years ago, but I was beginning to lose weight and starting to get interested in other aspects of ancestral lifestyles other than just a paleo way of eating. And what this movement that person was doing is called MovNat. And I started learning a little bit about it online. There wasn't too much to learn. And the gentleman who I watched was called Erwan Lecour, and he sort of had combined parkour with natural movement. So it took parkour, which is this thing that you would see in movies or documentaries or TV or whatever, where it started in France, where these kids would run around urban areas and jump around these buildings from one building to the other and do these crazy flips and all that. And for someone who had come from like an obese background, it was very difficult for me to do any kind of natural movement stuff. Like I still have a lot of problems when it comes to my own movement practice. And it really inspired me to expand my view of the ancestral view and sort of look at other aspects in my life that I can apply an ancestral view to in order to gain a health benefit. And I kept my eye out on the MovNat movement for years, and I had an email land in my inbox early or late last year, I can't really remember, talking about a MovNat course in Sydney. And this is where I met Matt Rutley, who is our guest for today. Matt was an incredible coach. He took us for 2 days through amazing natural movement styles and all these techniques that I wasn't aware of. It changed the way that I actually view my body. It changed the way that I interact with my physical environment, and it imprinted on me greatly. So it was such an interesting 2-day course for me, and I wanted to bring Matt on board. Firstly, Matt, I'll just say hello.
Hey, how you going?
How are you? Matt, I'll give a little bit of background. I have a bit of a blurb from Matt. So Matt Rutley is a human movement specialist and adaptability coach. He is the owner, founder, and head coach of Stage 6 Health and Fitness in Nundah, Australia. Well, is that right? Nundah, is that how you say it, Matt?
Yeah. Yep, that's how you say it.
So this is Australia's first dedicated natural movement facility. He has been coaching various sports and martial arts since 2010, both in Australia and the US, and is the MovNat Team Instructor for Australia and the Pacific Rim. Matt has always had the gift for learning and picking up new things. Growing up on a farm in the Australian bush, physical competence, efficiency, and adaptability were all part of Matt's daily existence. His father taught him and his brothers about bushcraft, carpentry, survival, hunting, tracking, butchery, and blacksmithing. He credits his this early education in natural movement and adaptability to his success as a coach, a semi-professional rugby athlete, a fighter, a craftsman, artist, and even a protection bullfighter, which I learned is another word for a rodeo clown. His passion now is natural movement as a way to help people unlock their own adaptive and creative potential. Welcome, Matt. How is everything going, mate?
Very, very good. The heat wave has slightly eased up here in Queensland, so things are a lot more comfortable now than what they were about a week ago.
Fantastic. Well, we're doing all right too. We're around 10 degrees cooler, which is still hot, 36 degrees today, but we're doing okay.
We're about 25 here, so.
How much is it?
So it's about 25 here. We're up in far north Queensland.
Yeah. Just
Hi, Matt.
Hey, how you going, Joe?
Good. I'm fascinated by your story. Just your bio is very fascinating. I can't wait to hear what you've got to teach us.
I can't wait to talk.
So this is I realized actually during the course is that Matt is really excellent at telling stories and talking about concepts and delivering it to people, and it really made me want to bring him on the show. So Matt, maybe give us a little bit of background about your how your early years came to prepare you for this kind of life, and what attracted you to it.
Yeah, well, so like I was saying, growing up on a farm. And particularly, like I credit mainly my father with the upbringing as far as movement goes, but it was one of those things where I took it for granted. I just assumed that it was the way that everyone was raised, and I even took it for granted that even sort of other country boys were raised the same way. But my father was a very extraordinary man, and part of what made him so extraordinary was the fact that he didn't and still doesn't understand that he is extraordinary. And so he was like a very resilient, resourceful, adaptable, and capable human. And so my brothers and I just had to keep up. And so in order to help him out on the farm, there was only really sort of two options, and that was to shape up or ship out. And so if we didn't keep up with him, then we weren't we weren't earning our keep. And so I assumed that was the way that everyone was brought up. And so when I moved away from home, every year I spent away from home, the more I realized that what I had experienced as a child and the breadth of knowledge that had been passed on to me by my father, and that was also held by my father, was truly unique. And that I had actually been given, through that upbringing, I'd been given quite a rare gift, and that was the ability to adapt to new things and transfer what I knew to new endeavors where that was a necessity of growing up on the farm, was that I just had to be able to pick things up very quickly. I couldn't afford to be slack on things. And so, mum definitely had, played a big role in, keeping us all well fed and well loved. But it really was watching my father, who is a very a jack of all trades, seeing him and the way he approached his life and the way he approached learning new things. Like he's always been a guy that had a very deep thirst for knowledge. And I noticed that even when I was a young kid, that my father, if he meets someone that knows something that he doesn't know, some people get threatened by that. Like a lot of people like to try and find what they have in common with people so that they can talk about what they already know and what is comfortable. My father's the opposite. He tries to find what he doesn't know that they do, and he seeks to be taught. And so he asks questions, and he really does care to learn things that he does not know. And so that was something that I very much inherited and picked up from him. And so that led me to a realization because like I grew up playing like lots of sports and not trying to blow my own trumpet, but because of my adaptability, I was very, very good at picking up new sports. And so I was always, there isn't a sport I haven't played that I didn't do well. I may not be the best in the world, but I did well at everything that I sort of put my hand to. And that sort of then carried on into other career choices. And so when I was, around 25, I sort of realized, I sort of put it all together that my movement, like my upbringing and that necessity to be able to adapt and learn new things was what had seen me succeed in that manner, and that it was all to do with the way I had moved as a child and the kinds of things that I was required to do. So that's really when I became passionate about trying to give other people those same tools. So using their bodies and moving their bodies the way they're designed to move, so that I could give them the same tools I had to transfer what they know to other aspects of their life.
So with MovNat in particular, can you give us a little bit of background for our who may not know about MovNat and what it is, and talk to us about the broad concepts that it brings to the table?
Yeah, so MovNat, where MovNat came from was Awan Lacour, as you mentioned, he created a system of essentially teaching people how to move the way we're designed to move. And so if you were to take a kangaroos all move like kangaroos. If you came across a kangaroo that moved like a crocodile, there would be something wrong with that kangaroo. The same with crocodiles. They move like crocodiles move. If there was a crocodile that was hopping like a kangaroo, you would think there was something wrong with the crocodile. And so we're no different. We are a very adaptive creature. We are the most adaptive animal in the animal kingdom. But we do still have physical designs and limitations on the joints and muscles of our body. We have specific ranges of motion that we are meant to express. We have specific, evolutionary adaptations that other members of even sort of our close relatives in the animal kingdom, like the great apes, we have. We're bipedal, therefore we have like longer legs, smaller arms. So we don't have the same sort of structure. So our bodies are very much designed to move in a certain way, and because we have domesticated ourselves, which is that's not all a bad thing. Like a lot of people in the rewilding movement talk about domestication as if it was a sin against humanity, but I am quite glad that I don't live in a cave anymore. I'm quite glad. Yeah, I enjoy things about it. I mean, I'm probably one of the more I do still really enjoy going out bush and trying to sort of pit myself against nature, but I enjoy the fact that is not a permanent struggle that I live in. And so we were able to domesticate ourselves and pull ourselves out of that environment and out of that sort of system of being, sort of every single day you didn't know where your meals were going to come from. You didn't know whether, you were going to get chased down by a pack of predators or something like that. But in that domestication process, what we have done is we've moved too quickly away from our design for our bodies to keep up. And so our bodies are still operating the same way that they did thousands and thousands of years ago. So Homo sapiens have been a recognized species for 250 odd thousand years, which means we are genetically the same as far as science is considered as to the humans that were around 250,000 years ago. Our bodies are no different. We've only been living a really domesticated life for the last couple of hundred years, really. We went agricultural 10,000 years ago, arguably. But so the majority of our time as a species, for 240,000 years, has been living at the mercy of the elements. And then even after that, movement was such a necessary part of our day-to-day life that we couldn't escape it. And so we didn't need to work out. We didn't need to train. Life was our training. Problem is we've get ourselves so successfully out of that system that we now don't have to move, and we don't need that movement. It's not a necessity, but our body does still need it. And so we're now struggling with the other sort of design thing that we have, where we have to try and conserve energy all the time because our body is still operating as a survival machine. And so because we want to conserve energy, we have to we have to force ourselves to move. When we force ourselves to move, we're often not honoring our design. And so we kind of need, MovNat's all about trying to honor the design so that we can actually start replacing the movement that used to be in our day-to-day life. We need to try and replace that so that we can essentially fulfill our human potential. And so, really it's just about trying to move like cavemen but not have to live like cavemen.
So can you break down maybe the basic human movements which MovNat focus on?
Yeah, so there's three main branches to it. There is the first and the biggest portion of your movement diet should be locomotive skills. And so that is moving your own body through space. So that is running, jumping, walking, crawling, climbing, balancing, all those sorts of skills where you are moving your body through space. And so when you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, that would have been the majority of our movement because it was looking for food, essentially, or migrating to more fertile places. So you then have the manipulative skills, which is moving other objects through space, which is lifting, throwing, catching. Again, we needed to lift heavy things and carry heavy things, but we also needed to throw things very accurately and powerfully. So, throwing spears or throwing boomerangs or other heavy objects at things, or even, let's be honest, at other people sometimes. And but then there was also, like carrying animals back to camp that had been successfully hunted, or building shelters, carrying logs to build bridges and things. So the third branch, and this is one of the aspects that really does set MovNat apart, is that it focuses on combative skills. And so that's the third little branch that we concentrate on, and the one we concentrate on the least. But fighting is in our DNA, and it's something that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. But there is a reason why we talk about the freeze, fight, or flight reflexes. Any animal has a fight reflex in it, and so you corner any animal, and any animal feels threatened enough, they will fight. And so it's something that we believe should be a skill that, like, for instance, we all have a legal right to defend ourselves, but not many people have the ability to successfully defend themselves. And so, again, that's part of our domestication process. Is there has been like violence has been made a taboo, and we say things like violence is never the answer, but that all depends on the question. If the question is how do we let someone know that we're a bit upset that they spilt our drink on the dance floor, then violence is not the answer to that question. But if the answer is, how do you protect yourself and those you love from someone or something that is trying to hurt them or you, then violence is very much an appropriate answer. So those are the three main movements. And so with the combative skills, it's your striking and grappling skills, which are just really an extension of the manipulative and locomotive skills. So it's kind of a combination of the two, but a little bit more specialized.
With these movements, are we losing them now from birth, or at what point does a human being start seeing a loss in this kind of movement?
Yeah, well, so it's a conversation I have a lot, because there is a school of thought that is quite accepted that I think is a little bit I think it misses the mark a little bit, and that is like people will talk about kids and the way kids move, and they say things like, "Oh, we just need to move like kids." Like, you know, watch a kid; they have a perfect deep squat, and you know the way they pick things up is perfect. Like they keep their spine straight and they lift with their legs, and yeah. We need to move like kids. Kids are uncoordinated. Like kids are cute and dorky, but they're not formidable and graceful creatures. They're still like, you know, their heads are too big for their bodies, and they're sort of, you know, they stumble around, and kids have very good default patterns. And so I don't think we are losing certain adaptations from birth through you know, diet and things like the diet of parents. Is affecting sort of, I guess, structural things from birth. But as far as movement goes, we are all born with very, very good default patterns, generally speaking. Like, you know, you might have some kinds of congenital or you know, birth defects that can affect babies, but most babies are born with very, very good default movement patterns. The problem is the way animals are designed to develop those movement capacities is, so you take, for instance, a pair of lion cubs, and so when they're young and they're all sort of cute and fluffy and cuddly, they do things like they play fight, and they stalk and sort of pounce on each other, and they chew their parents' ear, and we look at things like that and we think it's just adorable. And they make these squeaky little noises where a roar should be. They're just sort of making these weird little sounds. But the older they get, so they reach a point where, like those lion cubs will reach a point where, say, for instance, their parents will bring back a live gazelle for them to play with. And so they then play with the gazelle, and then the adult lion will come up and kill the gazelle and then eat it. And so then they start to bring the gazelle back, but they won't kill it. They leave it up to the cubs to kill it. And so then the cubs then start going out and joining in on the hunts. And initially they just observe, but then the adults will leave it up to the cubs to actually have to chase down and kill something. And so the skills that they're developing have all come from those games that they did by default. So you don't have to train a lion cub to play fight and to stalk and pounce. It's all very much in its DNA, but it's meant to develop those movements into adulthood where it ceases to become cute and cuddly and becomes something that is terrifying and formidable. And so you imagine too, sorry?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's sort of like an epigenetic expression of the movement itself, like the environment actually affords the child to develop these movements into like more defined skills rather than the early games that they'd be playing. So the environment plays a big part in the formation of these skills for later on in life, even though they have the blueprint in them for the expression of these types of movements. Is that?
Yeah, and so that's it. It's the default patterns that children have, and we do still see it. But what we see is, because adults are not moving the way they're meant to move, children reach an age where they go, okay, well, because I have so many clients that I see both at my facility, but also at all the MovNat events that I run. I have people that say things like, oh my God, you know, I used to do this when I was a kid, and oh, when I was a kid, I used to be able to do this, and it should be the other way around. Like we're designed for it to be the opposite way. We should be able to say, oh, weren't we, you know, like when I was a kid, I was terrible at this. Like now I'm much better at it. And kids should be looking to us to say, like when kids look at adults, they should be going, wow, like look at what they can do. Like look at what they're capable of. That's the way it's meant to be. But in the domestication process, we've lost that. And so there is still hope, because we are still born. Like I said, we're really no different to the human beings that were around, 250,000 years ago. And so we've still got all of those things within us. And that's what MovNat is about, is not teaching people new things. It's about unlocking potential. It's about remembering what and relearning what you already know, what is within your body. It's finding those default patterns and actually trying to develop them into what they should be.
Can you give us like an equivalent for the human beings in terms of fostering those skills culturally? Do we have any practices where it's common for the groups of human beings all around the world where we can see certain practices shared in common, which we think are cultural but are actually embedded into our behaviors with children to teach them such skills?
Well, so what you sort of have to look for in this scenario is the kinds of things that kids do naturally. So to start out with, you look at things like toddlers love to be chased and they love to chase. Again, you don't have to sit them down and explain that concept to them. They do it. Babies don't teach. You don't teach a baby to crawl. They teach themselves. The reason they crawl is because they can't walk yet. The reason that they crawl the way they do is because of certain physical limitations. Again, you look at the deep squat pattern of a child, the reason they do that is because their head's too big and they would just overbalance if they didn't squat with perfect form. So, but if you look at the games that kids play, kids roughhouse, kids play chase, kids pick things up and throw things. That's one of the things that you see so often these days is parents give like a phone to a little baby because they see it and they want it. First thing they do is grab it and throw it.
Yep.
And it goes on the floor and cracks the screen and everyone's like, oh no, but that's what they do. They want to. So there's these default movements that if we look at babies world over, it's universal. They all want to crawl. When they crawl, they want to climb up to things. Then they get walking. Then they get running. Then once they can do that, they're wanting to climb like on top of tables and on top of bookshelves. As soon as they can pick things up, they want to throw things. As soon as they can, as soon as they start interacting with each other, they start roughhousing. And then the interesting thing that I like to look at is the games, like you were saying, Fouad, that are cultural. And so if you actually go and look at the games played cross-culturally, so doesn't matter what culture, what religion, it doesn't even really matter what age, like every country, every religion has a version of tag. Doesn't matter where you go, kids want to play tag. And if you think then about what sort of evolutionary or what sort of biological skills that we're practicing there that would have seen that evolve as a default pattern, a game of tag is actually like, so it's predation and it's also evasion. It's learning how to run away from something or someone that is chasing you, and it's learning how to chase down something that you want to chase down. So it's the very development of hunting and evasion skills. There is also things like any kind of sort of dodgeball. Again, there's versions of dodgeball all through Indigenous Australian culture, Native American culture, in the Middle East. It doesn't matter where you go, there is versions of dodgeball, so throwing things accurately and with speed and dodging things. There is games, there's lots of language and dance games as well. And so, again, we ask why dancing is something that people do the world over. When you think about the kinds of things that are practiced when people do dance, so not only is it used as a storytelling tool traditionally, but it's something that a friend of mine we were talking about recently, and he was talking about dancing. There's a reason why guys that can dance are very popular with women. See a guy who can cut a rug on the dance floor, the girls are paying attention. Because if you think about what's actually being expressed in dance, there is a lot of physical prowess. So there is rhythm, there's coordination, there is like you can see from the way someone dances whether they move well. And so that's why women, again, it's a default pattern that they will look at a guy who can dance and go, that's a guy with physical prowess. He has rhythm, he has coordination, he has endurance, he has mobility. And so there's lots of things that we look at culturally that we can observe, and we see there's really only a handful of games that we play, but there's just lots of different versions of them. So all cultures have a form of tag. All cultures have like sprinting and like maximal expressions of like jumping and throwing. So like they all have wrestling in them. That's something that anywhere you go in the world, there are forms of wrestling that are traditional to those areas. And so again, you think about that from a physical point of view on what's actually being expressed. Someone who can wrestle, generally speaking, can fight, and so it was a non-lethal way of being able to sort out social conflicts and being able to figure out pecking orders. And so wrestling and roughhousing is an incredibly important aspect of all cultures. And a way that people develop social and physical intelligence, like sensory intelligence. So, there's a lot of research to show that children that weren't allowed to roughhouse are the ones that, when people say the expression, he doesn't know his own strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People that have been allowed to roughhouse know their own strength because they've explored it. Generally the people, like I do a lot of martial arts and wrestling and grappling, sort of currently, and the people that I least enjoy wrestling are people who have never played contact sports because they don't know how to meter the dosage. There's only survival mode. So there's nothing or there's flat out. And so yeah, there's you can look at these things, in ancient culture, but also looking at modern culture. A lot of the games that kids play, and even a lot of the sports that we watch and participate in, have all come from ancient tribal practices. And so there's a reason why people need motivation to often go to a gym and get on a treadmill. And there's also a reason why people don't need motivation they need less motivation to play games. Like if you can, we are designed to learn through play. And so yeah, that's why we do still hold on to a lot of those cultural and tribal traditions, even though they've often sort of evolved into sort of competitive team sports and things like that. But their roots are all based in the practice of those default patterns that I was talking about.
So this is an interesting point in terms of having these games culturally embedded to have some kind of genetic expression happening, and also for our bodies to be able to survive in the world the way that they're used to. But now that this is no longer the case and we don't have to go around hunting or sprinting, what are the negative repercussions of not having these movements in our lives anymore? So what do we see, and at what's like the minimum effective kind of amount of these things that we need in our lives to be healthy?
Well, so like what we're seeing is, I mean, we all know about the obesity epidemic. We all know about that. We also know about, because again, when you understand that the body is essentially a survival machine, you start to understand that we really, our body wants to store fat. Our body is designed to do it because, back a few thousand years, we weren't able to find enough calories to store enough fat. And so it's just our body wasn't ready for what was coming. And so but we see things like a lot of social. Have either of you guys looked at the work of or listened to the work of Arthur Haynes?
Yep, I have.
Yeah, so Arthur Haynes, he talks a lot about what we can learn from hunter-gatherer tribes and particularly sort of the way they raise their children and the way they are socially. But anxiety and depression are non-existent in hunter-gatherer peoples. It just doesn't. And we often hear, like, we say things, and it's like we have a lot of modern sayings that I don't think we delve deep enough into. So we'll often say things like, "Oh, sometimes the people with the least are the happiest people there are." You know, so you look at someone who's really, really rich, but it doesn't bring with it happiness, and then you look at somebody who is super poor. Lives in a village, they've got nothing to their name, but they're always smiling. And I think we can delve a little bit deeper into that. So movement was a big part of our social and emotional well-being as well. And that's why we learn through playing. It's all part of social conditioning. And you imagine a child that has never so when children learn, like you look at toddlers and you observe them playing, they often have to learn to share the hard way. The reason they learn to share is because, you know, you might get a kid who keeps taking something that belongs to another kid, and then the other kid bops them in the nose, and then they learn. They're like, oh, hang on a minute. Yeah, if I keep taking everything, there's a negative repercussion to that. And so a lot of the social conditioning, because we are social creatures, that's something that we don't really, we've been conditioned to sort of worship at the cult of individuality, but we are pack animals. And that's why when you look at prisoners, like you take prisons, for instance, they're a place that is full of the worst of the worst. So you've got rapists, murderers, thieves, all sorts of dangerous, violent criminals. What's the worst punishment that we have in prison for the worst of the worst?
Solitary confinement.
We lock them up away from other people. We take them and we put them out on their own. We banish them. And so even the worst of the worst, the punishment for them is to take away human contact. And so we encourage people to say things that I think are fairly empty, like, oh, you know, people who don't need people are the happiest people, and you know, keep sort of parroting these sayings. But that's not the case. We are social animals, and the movements that we like these sorts of things that we were doing also developed that. And so there's the obvious physical problems that we have with mobility issues and people with chronic sort of chronic illnesses and things from lack of activity. But then we also look at the social and emotional breakdown of the human organism, and a lot of that can be attributed to lack of movement. And so, like, we do a lot of work with kids with sensory processing disorders, and one of the best ways to increase their sensory awareness and their sensory processing abilities is to get them to move the way they're designed to move, because that requires like the whole reason we have senses is so our brain can collect information to inform our decision making. And so that's how our brain figures out not only what is happening around us, but also what has happened to us in the past, so that we can then make decisions that will essentially bring about maximum positive outcomes and minimum negative outcomes. And so if we're not moving and if we're not interacting with our environment, our senses just shut down because there's no need for them. Our body doesn't maintain things that it doesn't need to maintain, again, because it's a survival machine. So if you don't sit, if all you do is sit in chairs, your body doesn't worry about maintaining full mobility of the hips, because it says, well, that takes energy. I need to save this energy up in case of an emergency. And so I'm not going to worry about maintaining full mobility of the hips. And then it says, oh, okay, well, I don't need to worry about sort of maintaining good posture because I'm always looking down at a screen and I'm not ever looking around at my environment. So I'm going to shut down, like I'm going to atrophy the muscles around the neck and the spine. And then people end up with, sort of bulging discs because a lot of people think that bulging discs happen because you're lifting weight. But a lot of people that end up with disc injuries, it happens just getting in and out of the car. Like lifting heavy weights is not necessary to bust your back. You can get a busted back by just not keeping a healthy back. But even at a really sort of like micro level, everything in our body requires movement. Movement is everything. And so physical exercise helps circulate things through our body. It helps with our lymphatic drainage. So like the lymphatic drainage system requires pumping. There's no sort of pump for it other than movement. And so our immunity is very much tied to our lymphatic system and our digestive system. If we move, we improve digestion. If we move, we improve circulation. Everything in our body requires movement. And so we're seeing, like Fouad, like you said, we don't need to hunt. We don't need to run away from predators. Sometimes we do, and that's the issue. We sort of, because we don't have to do it as much, we seem to feel like we never have to do it. But there are still times where you need to fight off predators. It's just that predator might be some, drunk weirdo at a bar, and the instances of that are far less than what they used to be. So we still need movement because it's like if you take, for instance, someone over in Africa who has to trek, 5 kilometers to get fresh water and then carry that water 5 kilometers back home. If you think about what they're doing with their body, and then you think about somebody who gets ready for work and then has to carry their briefcase to the bus, get on the bus, drive, be driven 10 kilometers, then get off the bus and go to work and then do the same thing again in the afternoon, they're still using the same actual competencies. They're still walking and carrying, but they're just, one is more heavily reliant on it than the other. And so it's wrong to think that we don't need the same movement skills. We do need them. We just don't need to rely on them as heavily. So if we're excuse my French, if we're crap at them, we can still survive. If we were crap at them back in the day, then we just starved to death. And so you can still be a lazy mover, but you can still go to KFC and get your calories. And so you can still get food. It just comes a lot easier. So, I think a lot of issues, are linked in. Like if you take it and you keep asking, but why? And then somebody gives you the answer and you say, but why? If you keep tracing it back, a lot of it has to do with movement.
So this is this culture that we're living in now is one where, of course, exercise is always being told we need to exercise. And in my view, because I come from a whole foods background and Jo does as well, we've often spoken about this on the podcast where we see like a whole food diet being the natural diet for a human being, one that is based on eating natural foods. And when you eat that way and it's nutrient-dense, organic food that's seasonal, you're getting what your body needs and you don't need supplementation in your life in terms of like foods or vitamins or anything like that. And then you look at movement and you can compare our sedentary lives to junk food and you can say that it's the same thing. And then from there, movement and exercise is a form of supplementation for us that will basically try to undo the damages of the sedentary life or the junk food life of movement that we have. And there's so many forms of movement practices that one can do from like Pilates or CrossFit or MovNat and all that kind of stuff, and even traditional gym work. a lot of people would have, I mean, most people I know who go to gyms are going to just normal gyms where they lift weights and run on treadmill. And I did that for years before I was exposed to this kind of way of doing things. And I'm just wondering from your perspective, and if you can illuminate to the listeners, what you see the faults are in things like traditional gym work versus a movement like MovNat. How would you to?
So the thing with I mean, this is something that I often sort of say to people. Nothing has all the answers, and there are always more than one way to skin a cat. And so, but the analogy you used of the whole food diet is spot on. And so, let's say, for instance, there is somebody out there who really, really enjoys going to the gym and getting on the treadmill. Because the thing with healthy food is there really is I don't believe there is a such thing as a healthy food. There is just foods with different nutrient content. So people think like broccoli or something. They're like, oh yeah, broccoli, that's really healthy. No, it's not. It's not. Broccoli is just broccoli. It's how you eat it that makes it healthy. Because if all you eat is broccoli, then you're going to end up sick. Because you're not getting other nutrients, you're not getting other needs met. And so that's why with movement, you need variety. Like you can say, okay, well, people talk about marathon runners and they say, oh yeah, marathon runners, they're really fit, they're really healthy. Are they though? Because they've all got knee problems, they've all got shin splints, and so well, that's a form of specialty. That's a form of just eating broccoli. If you're a marathon runner, that's great, but every marathon runner will tell you that you need other work to supplement that in order to make up for the fact that you are too sort of too heavy in that sort of on that movement food. And so the key really is variety. If you can find something like MovNat that really does cast a very broad net. So there are things where you're getting mental engagement, physical engagement. You're getting lots of different forms. So it's not just all heavy lifting, but it's also not just all sort of lightweight, high rep kind of stuff, where you're working on fine motor skills, but also ballistic power development, and you're jumping, things like box jumps, for instance. I once asked a CrossFitter, they were saying, they said, I really love doing box jumps. Like I'd love, like box jumps are just one of the best exercises ever. And I asked them why, and they said, it's just like, jumping is like a really important human skill. And I said, yeah, but what box jumps? Like what are they really practicing? Like, like jumping up and down from something. I said, yeah, jumping up and down from a box. Could you does that necessarily mean that you're going to be able to jump from one box to another accurately? No. In order to do that, you need to jump from one box to another. Does it mean you're going to be able to jump down from something like really high and land safely? No. In order to get better at that, you need to practice that. And so my sort of I'm not too militant about sort of what people train. I more try to encourage people to get a wide variety. Like you have to enjoy what you're doing. There has to be some social benefit. You could, if I locked myself away, for instance, if I sort of said, no, I'm only going to do MovNat and I'm going to ostracize myself from society in order to move like a caveman all the time, and I'm going to go completely off grid, then I'm going to start to suffer ill effects of that isolation. It's going to start to be like solitary confinement. And so if I'm not doing something that requires me to also interact socially, if I'm doing something that I have to sacrifice too much sleep in order to do. If I'm, you know what I mean? Like it has to be about variety and it has to be balance. It's exactly the same as food. You know, there is no such thing really as completely terrible movement. Any movement is good movement, but it really you need to be thinking the same way you think about food. Like you need to care about what you're putting in your body. You also need to care about what you're doing with it. You know, you can't just sort of shovel stuff in. Like if somebody gave you some weird looking plant and said, "Here, eat this," you're not going to eat it. You're going to ask them what it is. You're going to say, "But what are you giving me?" No, don't worry about it. Just eat it. You know, I need to know what it is. Like, is it poisonous? Like, is it like, what does it do? Where did it come from? What is it? What is it? And so same thing with the movement. Like, ask why. Don't just sort of, because a lot of people do think that it is like a supplement, and a lot of people treat it the way they treat supplements in their normal life, and that is, oh, if I take this, it makes up for the fact that I'm not doing a proper job of it anyway. And so they go to the gym as like a penance. And so they see it as like a punishment. Like it's oh, I had a Mars bar, and so I now need to atone for my sins, and so I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to sort of prostrate myself at the gods of fitness guilt. But yeah, it's the same thing with food. You don't just supplement for the sake of it. You need to know what it is and why you're putting it in your body. The other thing that I would warn people about, though, with a lot of traditional fitness, and this is something that I sort of focus very heavily on, and it is one of the things that really struck me about MovNat. So, like full disclosure, with MovNat didn't teach me anything I didn't know already. I was able to go and do my certification training without any practice. It was all stuff that I already knew how to do because of the way I grew up and because of the way I had continued to move throughout my life. But what I've found in MovNat, and what I recognized in MovNat, was it was a really, really amazing system for getting people who weren't as lucky to have the upbringing as I was to try and give them the same foundation that I had. And one of their philosophies is getting conditioning through skill development, because a lot of people try and reverse engineer it. Like, people go to the gym so that they can get fit so that they can then go and try and do something else. MovNat's philosophy is train get your conditioning through the skill development. Actually develop the skills, and then the conditioning will happen. Don't go and try and train to get fit so you can then practice the skills. Get fit practicing the skills. Mm-hmm. And so I find that a lot of traditional fitness is based around negative motivation. It's based around cookie cutter ideas of what health and fitness looks like, and it's based around essentially selling people unhappiness. It's taking advantage of a lot of people's insecurities, and they say, oh, you need to look like this, and we've got the pill, like we've got the answer. Focusing on, like, I would encourage people to focus on what they're capable of. Don't worry about how you look. Don't worry about getting fit. Like, people say, I want to get fit. Fit for what? Like, what is it that you want to get fit for? Like, is it to keep up with the...
You taught me, Matt, was standing up from the ground. And This is one of the things that I was just really, like, I enjoyed learning. Like, it's so funny because I've been to gyms for, years in my life, and I had no clue how to get up. Like, if I was sitting on the ground, I didn't know how to get up. And even though I could have, bulked up with muscle, could be fast or whatever it is, I still didn't know how to stand up. I didn't know how to get myself to the ground. And that's a very good point you're making. But isn't it also true that you definitely get benefit from conditioning? Let's say you do sprints or you lift weights or things like that, that when the time comes for you to come and carry that, sofa with your brother and help him move house, that you will be stronger for it. Like,
that's what I mean, is that it's about developing the skills. So, for instance, if if you're not developed, like sprinting, for example, sprinting will get you better for if you need to sprint. If I wanted to, like, let's say, for instance, I said, I want to get better as a swimmer. Sprints aren't going to help me get better as a swimmer. Swimming is going to help me getting better as a swimmer. And so if you want to, like lifting things, like you said, like helping your brother move a couch. Yeah. The way to get better at that is to do unusual lifting. It's not to do bicep curls. Do you know what I mean? Like, so there's a whole heap of junk training, like it's sort of like junk food training out there where people say, oh, I want to get stronger. And so, well, why not get better and then you'll get stronger and what I mean by getting better is like develop the skills. Don't worry about saying, oh, I want to get stronger, so I'm going to do bicep curls. Well, why not climb and lift, and then you'll get bigger biceps, but you'll also develop the skill at the same time. It's essentially just trying to kill two birds with one stone. Yeah. So a lot of people go, oh, well, I want to go and get stronger so I can be more useful outside the gym. Okay, well, make sure that what you're training inside the gym involves skills that are going to help you outside the gym. Bicep curls are going to give you bigger biceps. They're not necessarily going to help you shift a couch. Shifting a couch has got to do with all sorts of things like cooperative training, all different sort of muscles like deadlifting and hip hinging and being able to balance precariously as you walk up and down steps. And so doing bicep curls to get better at helping someone shift a couch is a waste of time. Going and actually doing a whole heap of different lifting, that'll get you better at it.
I've been doing CrossFit recently. This may be my 4th or 5th time. And, I do wish there was like a MovNat gym next to where I live, but there isn't. And I'm using CrossFit functional training, and I do enjoy aspects of it. One of the things, like, for instance, we're doing is, like, I was trying to go up a rope, and I found that really useful. I thought that's a skill that, I'd love to be able to do. But another one that they had was this, like, I was carrying this ball, and I was doing, like, squats with the ball, then sort of standing up and then throwing the ball in the air, catching it, and repeating that over and over. And it just wall balls. And I was like, I can understand like throwing something from the ground, but just doing 10 times in a row, like in that kind of sequence, just didn't make much sense to me. It didn't seem as functional as, say, putting myself up with a rope. And they do have these kinds of things where part of the movements are just incredible for functional training, but other stuff just doesn't make too much sense in day-to-day life, like the box jumps or something like that as well.
To me, it's more the application. Like I was a CrossFit coach, as well, and so I worked over in the States as a CrossFit coach when I was over there playing rugby. And CrossFit, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with CrossFit. I see that there are a lot of really, really good benefits to CrossFit. What it does better than any other system is it gets people actually off their ass, and it gets people engaged, and it gets people moving. But because the word functional grinds my gears, because I've seen it become just this buzzword that is being misused. Functional just depends. Like when people say functional training, you go, well, what's the function? And people say, oh, like a lot of people think functional just means difficult.
Yeah, isn't it opposed to like a single plane of motion where you're, for instance, doing bicep curls or anything like that? You're actually trying to do some kind of movement that you would do in real life as a function.
Yeah, so that's that's the thing with functional movement is what is functional for a downhill slalom skier to train is going to be different for what's functional for a powerlifter to train. And so what needs to be thought of, and this is the thing, is just about any movement can become beneficial. It all depends on the mindset and the application while you're doing it. And so if you go a little bit further than functional and you actually try to start thinking about practical, that's when you start to get these real benefits. And so like the wall balls, for example, like throwing something from your chest up to a height, like if you were helping someone load up their 4-wheel drive for a camping trip, you're going to be using that. Even in the negative sense, like in the reverse sense, somebody throwing something down to you from the top of a 4-wheel drive or from a second-story balcony, like those sorts of things. That pattern is very functional and it is very practical, but doing 150 of them just in a like up from the same point to the same point and never really changing the mechanics, that's where, to me, it kind of becomes a little bit null and void. You go, well, there's more to practicing throwing things than just doing the same throw again and again and again. You need the variety. You need to be able to change not only the size of the objects that you're throwing, but the trajectory and the application of it. And so that's why, to me, I think the most important thing for people is to just try and put a little bit of a different lens on the way they view movement and start to think about how they can change it so that it's going to help them outside of a gym. Because nobody goes to a gym to get better at going to the gym. Initially, everyone goes to a gym so that they can get better at whatever they're doing outside of the gym. Even if that's some guy starts going to a gym because he wants to get, a better physique so he can start having more luck with the ladies on the weekend. It doesn't matter. He's training to get better at doing something outside of a gym. So you shouldn't ever lose sight of exactly what it is that you're trying to get better at. If you want to get better at keeping up with the kids, then make sure that everything you're doing always has that sort of lens. Make sure you're always looking at it through that lens. Like, how can I change this, or how can I alter what I'm doing so that it is going to make me better at keeping up with my kids? How can I change this so it's going to make me better at life, rather than just doing what you're doing because someone told you to do it? Always ask those questions. Why? Like, how is it benefiting me? What am I doing with my body? What is the benefit? What is the cost? Does the risk outweigh the reward, or does the reward outweigh the risk? And so people just need to start asking more. The same way with their food, they need to start caring about what they put inside their body. Start caring about what you do with it.
Matt, can I just ask you for some practical advice for kids? Like, what kind of exercises can parents get their kids to do at home to help them with all this kind of stuff?
Just getting them moving more. The good thing about kids is that they love to play. If you can make a game out of it, you can get them to do just about anything. But
older kids too, like teenagers. I just notice with a lot of people that I help, kids with anxiety, kids with gut issues, I think a lot of it's not just the food. It's also, like you say, they're not getting out into nature. They're not getting out into fresh air. They're not running around and doing things. They're stuck inside at school. Then they're at home doing homework. Then they're at the computer. They're at the TV. And I know with my own boys, that's been a big thing. We've had to work on getting them outside more, and that really helps with their mindset.
So no, I sort of with kids, to me, it's important to try to, like, one of the things that's important is to model to them that it's okay for adults to move. Yeah. So when kids, because one of the things that kids also do by default is they mimic their parents. Again, there's an evolutionary sort of reward system set up for that behavior. That is how, because before there was a formal education system, that was the only way you learned, was by watching, observing, and doing. And so that's how children learned how to do the things, was by looking at the adults and going, wow, that's how it's supposed to be done. And so then they would keep trying until they could do something that resembled what the adults were doing. The issue is, if our kids see us doing nothing but looking at a computer screen and sitting in a chair, they're going to model that behavior. Because I remember when we were little kids, because Dad was Dad was a carpenter by trade. we always wanted to be sort of building things, and we were, when we were little kids, we were sort of hammering, imaginary nails in and all these sorts of things, and like we would also model mum, like, sort of we would want to put an apron on and help her in the kitchen. And so I think it's really important to just try to model. I mean, it's a bit harder for teenagers because they sort of hit that sort of too cool for school stage. But like sport is a good thing, but also sport's not for everyone. Like some kids just don't.
I've got one son who's totally into sport and another one who really isn't, and he's the one that I get most concerned about because he's such a he loves the computer, he loves learning languages and all that kind of thing, but it's all inside stuff. So, I need to find ways to get him out more. And
I find that a lot of the stuff that we do in our kids' classes, we have a lot of success with kids that are not like a lot of the kids that come along to our kids' classes are specifically kids that do not do well in team sports, and but again, that idea of like kids that like computer games, they like games.
Yeah,
and so
if
you can muck around with them and you can make it essentially like we did a session here last week where we had like some soft foam balls. Like there was each team had 10 soft foam balls, and I basically just made a sort of indoor skirmish game. And
well, they love that.
Well, they're like, oh, it's like Call of Duty.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They're all sort of adding things on to the game, and they ran with it. They ran with it, and so just finding
they do
things
love,
like
having their Nerf wars around the neighbourhood.
Yeah, and so encouraging them to do things like that. I mean, all kids, like particularly boys, they all want to wrestle.
Yeah.
They all want to roughhouse. Like I know, like Saturday morning for us when we were kids was always that was roughhouse morning. Like Dad would come into our bedroom and he would start with the tickling, and then it would end up usually with Mum in tears because someone had put their head to a wall or something. But it was, to us, it was some of the best memories that we have of childhood was just wrestling from one end of the house to the other, and any sort of stuff that you can do like that to try and get them engaged and enjoying it, and don't sort of sorry.
I'm happy to report that girls enjoy it as well. I have a 4.5 and a 6.5, and they definitely love wrestling with me. And they also mirror my movements. I've got a slack line that I put out back, and they don't really play unless I'm going out and playing, and all of a sudden like they want to go on it. And you're right, like they do look at us for their movement patterns, and sometimes when even the way that they move their body is similar to the way I move my body, which is not a great thing, but like they model us psychologically and physiologically as well.
No, totally. And so with people trying to get kids moving, I think sometimes it can be a little bit of an uphill battle, but I think that's more so, just find something that they enjoy and encourage them to. You can even take that, even if what they enjoy is not super physical, just try and sort of take elements of that and find ways to make it physical.
Well, for us, our main fun time, I guess, for myself and the kids and my husband as well, is really just going bushwalking and climbing around creeks and waterfalls and swimming. And it's just that I think we just need to do it more often. We might only do it once every week or two, but where we live, it's just the perfect environment. And when I was a kid, that's what we did every single weekend. We were out all day just swimming and walking and climbing and kayaking, and we were always very fit kids, and we didn't do exercise, we were always outside.
And I think that's probably a really important aspect of it is doing things that are not exercise. Like exercise to kids feels like homework. Yeah,
because I do workouts and they're just like, oh no, I don't want to do that, because I try to get them involved.
It's too much like school.
Yes.
but games are fun.
But if I take them for a walk, they enjoy that, and running with the dog and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never been a gym person myself. I've been one day of my life, so I'd much rather be outdoors. Go ahead, Fouad.
Yeah, no,
I've had this. Actually, this is a question I've had. Like, one of the things that I've done recently is I have a reserve next to my house that I found, which is incredibly beautiful. I didn't even know it was there. And then I started going and just for a walk. And then all of a sudden I found myself running in it. And it's not like something I do. I'm not a runner, man.
Yeah.
And now I'm loving it. I used to hate running, and I still do. If you put me like on the streets, I just would never do it. What's with MovNat? Where does nature come in? Because I know you're focusing on natural movement, but there's also, whenever you look at videos of people doing MovNat, it's always in nature, even though our training was in a gym. Where does nature fall into the philosophy, and how to best incorporate it?
Yeah, well, so I mean, nature, like the actual sort of training outdoors, is one of those things that, like our environment, like it or not, as modern humans, is largely man-made. But what nature offers is, like how I was talking about that sensory activation. Like when you go out into nature, because it is a constantly changing and evolving thing, the amount of sensory awareness that you develop by being out there, and it's one of those things that you would notice every time you go on a bushwalk. If you actually just stop and become aware of your surroundings, you will see things that you didn't see. Like you will all of a sudden see that everywhere around you is alive. Like you will notice little insects, you notice little reptiles, you notice birds, you notice sounds. And so from my perspective, training outdoors is not necessarily it's a bonus. But if you live in an area where you don't have a reserve sort of, nearby, and all you have is an urban environment, then that's fine, but you need to interact with it. Because, again, that is something that we're sort of conditioned societally not to do. Like we stick to the path. And I was doing some parkour with a bunch of guys here in Brisbane who they would go early on a Sunday morning. And so I tagged along with them and showed them some of the stuff that I do. And so but we were doing a little run that we'd sort of figured out. And it was it was beside a long staircase, but beside the set of stairs there was a wheelchair access ramp. And so it was a very, very sort of tall flight of steps. So the wheelchair access ramp had sort of about 5 switchbacks in it. And there was a whole bunch of garden beds sort of built into it. And we were running up the like jumping over the paths, climbing up walls, all the rest of it, getting to the top. And there was a guy that sat there and watched us for a while, and he was watching us, but he was annoyed at what we were doing. And after a while, he said, "Why don't you just use the bloody steps?" he thought he was being funny, but because he was just, but it was clearly annoying him that we were doing what we were doing. And I said, "I'll race you to the top." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, if you want to know why we don't use the steps, I'll race you to the top." I said, "You start at the bottom of the steps. I'll start here, and we'll see who gets up there first." And he said, and he sort of, because he started to get a little bit huffy, and he said, "I don't see your point." I said, "Well, what if I had to get from here up to there as quickly as I could? For me, that's that way. For you, it's the stairs. If we were getting to the top to $1 million, I'd be $1 million richer than you would." And so that's like we sort of had this societal conditioning to follow the path and to stay. Like we go to parks and they put walking paths around the park. Why not just let people walk around the park?
Yeah.
Like why do you have to always lay things out? And so
because we're not part of the natural environment, Matt, didn't you know? We've
been separated from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things that, to me, that's why, like, I mean, nature is a very much a big bonus, like being able to train outdoors in that constantly changing and very sort of very chaotic. I mean, it's quite a chaotic environment. Like, it's always changing. There's a lot more things that can go wrong, which means you're far more mindful while you're doing it.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, it makes it so much more interesting to me, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, and that's definitely, like, if that, you know, if everyone could, then that would be awesome. Some people can't. But that doesn't mean they still can't get engaged with their environment.
Sorry, Matt, keep going.
I was just going to say, like, even people who live in a very heavily sort of urban environment can still interact with their environment. They just need to start to sort of break down the barriers and think outside the box.
With just going back to this with kids, one of the things that I've been told recently is to get them to do the different animal walks. Do you do all that kind of thing with them, like for their development, just learning all the, especially kids with sensory processing disorder and things like that?
Yeah, well, so crawling makes up a big part of, like, we're always trying to get kids down and crawling because it's a it's one of those things. I also like to get adults crawling. It's one of my favorite things to do with people because when you say to someone, we're going to crawl, a lot of people assume that's an easy thing because it's what babies do. But to crawl from a practical sense requires a lot of stability. And when you think about when you would crawl over or under something, sort of when you're crawling underneath something, you often need to be able to do it, sort of at speed, and it's about staying as low as you can. And when you're crawling, like if you were going over something very high, you would want to crawl. Like if you were cleaning out the gutters on a 2-story house, you would want to be down on all fours when you were close to the edge. You wouldn't want to just stand up precariously. And so crawling is one of those things that a lot of people don't have their patterns are broken down. And so it's something that we have all done, but it doesn't take long. And so it's a really good metaphor for movement in general, because even though it's something that we've all done at some point, as soon as you start to ask people to go back into that, a lot of people can't do it. And their bodies just hasn't bothered to maintain that pattern. And particularly with kids, like it's scary to me when I get kids that are like, sort of 4 years old. Their movement is still quite good. And so they can crawl, they're quite coordinated, they can do all the sorts of things. They've got good mobility in their hips. The difference between a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old is visible because they've already started sitting. They've already started, going to school. The difference between a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old is devastating to me. Like it hurts me to see the difference that happens to children in such a short space of time, and the difference in coordination, the difference in everything. Even though they're getting bigger and stronger, they're often and so it really is terrifying to me to see the kinds of steps backwards children, even at the age of 8, are taking.
It's funny you should mention that. I was talking to my friend who's a remedial therapist yesterday, and she said that she had a boy come to her. She also is a Pilates instructor, and she was working with him, and I think he was 6 to 8, somewhere in there, and he couldn't even squat. He couldn't physically get his bum down enough to squat.
Yeah.
I thought, I don't even have any trouble doing that. I have no problem doing that. And I'm thinking, how come a kid that age can't do that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's alarming. And so the less we essentially the less activity that we're requiring of children these days, it's really becoming alarming how, because it used to be, it wasn't until someone's like all through your childhood you were still moving. You were running at school, you were going and running around on the weekends, you were riding your push bike everywhere. You were sort of, like for us, we were, riding horses and climbing trees and helping Dad out and going hunting and fishing and all that kind of stuff. And that, for me, didn't really ever stop. But for most people, it didn't stop until, maybe sort of university or work. Like, people were still extremely active at school. And so, but now we're seeing, kids
starting really young.
Very much.
Well, you do see kids right from the time of 2 years old. They're sitting there in prams with iPads. And I'm not having a go at anyone who does that, but it just, for me, like, my kids were always walking with me, and sure, it had to go slow. But as soon as they could walk, I was trying to get them to walk. And I generally had another baby that had to be in the pram anyway. I had 4 kids. Yeah. But, we didn't actually have a TV or computer growing up, so we were always outside, always. And
we'll see Dad loathed any kinds of computer games or TV was, and unless it was the ABC weather or the 7:30 report.
Yeah, that was about it. Yeah, when we were someone's place, we were told, play outside. Don't turn the TV on. So,
Well, playing outside is a thing that most parents are afraid of. Like, we're just, we don't want our kids out of our sight anymore.
Yeah, that's
we just
it.
Can't.
But this is again something that's the research is showing us very much that without risk, like, kids need risky play. Kids need to learn how to manage risk and how to solve physical problems.
It's part of resilience, isn't it?
Yeah, and what they're finding is, in order to save the discomfort of a bumped and scraped knee when they're a kid, it's actually having quite a far greater toll on children when they grow up without those sorts of learnings in their database. And so, it's like that thing when we talk about the sort of violence isn't the answer, and like a lot of parents don't like their kids to wrestle or roughhouse with other kids, but you would much rather your child learn at the age of 4 that it's not okay to get pushy and shovey with someone because they're probably going to punch you back. You want them to learn that when they're young rather than when they're 18 years old and got a gut full of alcohol.
I think they're the king of the mountain.
Arthur Haynes, you mentioned Arthur Haynes before, and for anyone who hasn't heard of Arthur Haynes, there's a few podcasts with Daniel Vitalis on Rewild Yourself podcast, which is an excellent podcast. I mentioned it here many times, but he says about his daughter, he's got a baby daughter, which he said as she was growing older, he would have this metal stove in his house, or the fireplace. I can't really remember which one it was, but he would sort of wait until it's cool enough so that it doesn't actually burn her, but it's still really hot. She always would
teach a lesson.
That's right, yeah. And just, he goes, she touched it once, and she that was all it took to remember that she shouldn't do that again. And indigenous cultures would let kids play with knives, like they put the knives out and the kids would play with, encouraging anyone to do that. But this is something that's been part of the way that we parent for a long time, to allow kids to have their own sovereignty on their own decision making, and not to be sort of looked at as people that we own, or we have to make decisions for them all the time. That they should be given the ability and opportunity and the environment to express themselves and what they want from an early age, but also to understand that their decisions come with repercussions, so that they're not pushed by.
On the knife thing, like that was. Like I have a little saying. I stole it from somewhere, but I always say, "A man without a knife is a man without a life."
My husband would agree with you.
when all of us boys were 12 years old, that's when we got our first knife.
Yeah, my kids pretty much have too.
Yeah, Dad made sure that those knives were that sharp that they could shave the hair off his arms, and he would give us the knife, and the only instruction that we got with it was Dad would like take a slice of hair off his arm and then say, "That's bloody sharp. If you muck around with it, you'll get cut." And that was it. And so I learned I've never cut myself badly with a knife because I had that much sort of respect for them as a child, seeing how sharp they were, that I've learned to deal with knives in a very careful way. People that don't know knives or people that only know blunt knives, they're the ones that are likely to chop a finger off. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot to be said for that kind of stuff with kids. And I mean, my father, it was that age of 12. Like, my dad had a heart to heart with me when I was 12 years old, and like I said something under my breath. He chastised me for arguing with my mother, and then he left the room. And under my breath, I thought I'd be manly enough to tell him to go stick it. Of course, not loud enough for him to hear it, but Mum heard. So Mum said, "What did you say to your father?" And I hear Dad just boom, 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 turn around and come back in the room. And so he said, like, "What did you say to me?" And I thought, well, you're either a man or a mouse. And so I told him to his face what I'd said. And he dragged me up from the table, and he couldn't figure out what to do because he sort of looked at me, and he's ended up giving me a smack on the bum. And I just looked at him like, "You serious?" Like, a smack on the bum. And so then he said, "Oh, you're a bit old for that, aren't you?" And I said, "Yep." And he goes, "All right, well, let's go over to the shed and have a talk about it." And so we actually went over, and, he sat me down and gave me, my first beer and said, "Look, if you're too old to get a smack in the bum," he said, "you're a man." And he said, "From now on," he said, if you're too old to get a smack in the bum," he said, "if you mess up bad enough, it'll be a smack in the mouth." Yeah. And he said, "So you're officially a man, so act like." And from that age on, from 12, and I know, like, when I was in the States, I sort of played rugby with a lot of guys who were sort of perpetual frat boys. And they used to say things to me. They were like, oh, what's your problem, man? Like, you're still young. Like, you're not, like, you're still a kid. And I was like, I'm 25 years old. I've been a man since I was 12. Like, I don't know what kind of life you're living, but I think that's what I mean. Dad didn't. That was Dad, and I never got a smack in the mouth from Dad because I never messed up bad enough, because there was that real accountability of, okay, well, I'm now an adult, and with that comes responsibility. And so I think we make a mistake of treating children like they are idiots. Yeah. But kids are devilishly smart. Yes. And we know it because we see them we see them push the limits, and we see them particularly when they're young. Kids are so manipulative. And they're so good at being manipulative and, sort of throwing fake tantrums or pretending to be more hurt so they can get their siblings in trouble and stuff like that. Like, kids are incredibly intelligent. And so to me, I sort of think that is a big mistake that we make, is we don't trust our kids with the intelligence to make informed decisions, but they really are that smart. And if we can provide an environment where it is, where the consequences, because again, like, if we just let kids, like climbing trees, for example, if we just let kids climb a tree and we don't teach them how, because we can't actually get up there ourselves, they learn by trial and error. Yeah. If we can climb up there with them and show them, that's when they go, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. And so we can say to them, like, make sure you don't, like, if you can climb up there, you can climb down from there. Just remember that. So don't ever panic. If you got up there, you can get down from there. So, just sort of keep your wits about you and keep climbing down, and also teach them how to land. Like, if they fall out of a tree, make sure they know how to land, because it's not falling out of a tree that hurts you. It's when you hit the ground on the other end. And so, yeah, I think we just need to. I think we need to trust our kids a lot more to make the decisions that come naturally to them.
Don't wrap them up in cotton wool.
Yeah, because the overall cost in the long run is far greater.
It is. Mm.
Now we're up on time. So, can you let our listeners know where to find out more about you and your gym and what you do?
Yeah, so you can check us out at stage6fitness.com.au. We're also on Facebook and Instagram as Stage 6 Fitness. If you check us out, like we're regularly posting stuff on there. I've got a bit of a blog sort of explaining my philosophies and why we do things the way we do things here. There's some sort of some light reading there for anyone who's interested. But yeah, other than that, just the usual channels of social media.
Okay, what's your blog address?
That's on our website as well. So if you just go to Stage 6.
We'll put the link in the notes anyway so that people can click on that. That'll be good. Yeah, thank you so much for that. That's very helpful.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. And, thank you, Fouad, for facilitating.
Pleasure, man. Thank you so much for coming on board. We really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Bye.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.